participate in that program. And I'm a kid who grew up as a military brat, a Federalist. We were like indoctrinated. We took all of the vaccines and crud that they handed out. And now I wouldn't allow that for any child of mine. I've got dogs and I won't let them get vaccinated.
I agree totally. So what would you advise parents if the schools tried to pull that your kid can't come to school unless he gets this vaccination?
Well, let me put it to you this way. If enough parents didn't do it, the school doesn't exist. That school does not exist without the children inside it. It's its whole reason for existence. So if enough parents just said, I refuse to cooperate in a nonviolent, organized or disorganized fashion, it doesn't matter, but I refuse to allow my child to participate in this on a moral ground, and we will stand and suffer the consequences of that, you're going to get a lot of people that will stand with you. And if enough of them stand with you, that school has to close, because those teachers will have no one to teach. The administrators will have no one to boss around. And bear in mind, this whole issue of mandatory vaccinations is at a state level. It's not a federal thing. Yes, they've mandated it at the Homeland Security and so on, but they don't have the ability to enforce it. That's why they're telling the states to enforce it through all these weird mechanisms. So these state representatives and stuff, they're within your state capital. And we're going to see situations where state capitals will be inundated, overtaken, shut down by parents that are just outraged over what is proposed to be done to their children. Some states may not. You may find places that are compliant, Maybe someplace in Texas, everybody will go to school, and maybe someplace in New Hampshire or Vermont, all the parents will get down there and shut down the whole state capitol until they rescind this vaccine business. People are educating themselves. There's a huge wave going on. We caught that wave about 6 months out, and it's going to turn very ugly this year. I don't know that the government's going to take any punitive action. I don't think they can. Bear in mind, there's billions of us and very few of them, and they're running scared. Have you been on YouTube? Have you seen the Arlen Specter video of him going to a town meeting?
Oh, definitely. We were talking about
that same meme is running everywhere. That kind of anger and emotion is everywhere. And you think it's angry about the healthcare system now and the disputes they were having then. Wait until it comes to everybody going back to school time and they tell all the kids to line up for vaccines. There's a whole lot of parents that I know that are really paranoid.
With good reason to be.
Yeah, oh, yeah, exactly so. Yeah, they're not wrong just because they're paranoid. And so it looks like it's going to be this, I think that'll be the last stand, so to speak, or the first stand, however you want to think about it. And government's going to get a huge slap in the face. And it won't just be here. It'll be all over Europe. There seems to be some level of cooperation in hospitals so far in places like Cambodia and Vietnam. But it appears that it's also a case of they're out so far outside of the mainstream of the internet world that they're just not being informed at all that there's any dispute about vaccines in general or about this vaccine in particular. So circumstances have changed, and our refuseniks will start a revolution pretty much a planetary revolution in the developed world beginning this fall over this issue.
Well, so somebody preparing at home, obviously, we discussed food and what to put away to fight the flu. What other preparations?
I would say also we need to consider the idea that the powers that be in dealing with the refuseniks will attempt to make some examples, and they'll attempt to make life harsh for people, but they're going to be caught in a trap. Sorry to digress here, but this needs to be said. There will be examples coming out of the press, which is their propaganda arm, and I'm talking main TV kind of thing, right, because newspapers are dying. But TV will come and tell you that these people, they refuse to take the vaccine. Look how deluded they are. A bunch of nutcases listening to this stuff on the internet. They have to be quarantined for their own good. And it won't be a generalized movement. It'll, again, be another put-up job, another attempt to use fear language to promote the other people to go along and get the vaccine so they don't get subjected to this, quote, harsh treatment of self-quarantine. But the examples will be very few, and most people won't pay attention to them.
Well, you brought up, I was going to bring this up later, but since you brought it up, I'll jump into it. One thing we've been saying on the show quite a bit was the powers that be aren't the gods they think they are, and it's actually going to fall apart on them.
Well, you're correct. No argument there. These people are clever, but they're not really smart. They're very manipulative. They're psychopathic. They have all of those skills. They know how to manipulate Group A against Group B, but once those groups dissolve, their power base is gone. And that's why these self-organizing collectives and the idea of getting together with your friends and neighbors and discussing this and debating it and coming to, your various different conclusions and getting together for mutual support is so important, because it actually ends up removing more and more power from the powers that be every time that we do it. And pretty soon they'll be the powers that were, and we'll go on to actually a much brighter future. And we can take the power back. If everybody were to decide to remove all their money tomorrow from the banks, the whole central bank and warfare model that has operated in this planet for the last 500-600 years would collapse, and we'd be done with it.
Excellent. That's right. Further out is very encouraging, but my main goal is to help people survive what's coming up in the next year.
In the immediate future, correct. And I agree with you. If you have any resources at all, the thing to do is to sit down and be very smart and decide, look at your basic diet. Do those things that you need to make that make sense to you right now. And I'll tell you, as somebody who's been through some hard times, don't do things like buy buckets of wheat kernels, for instance, if you don't use those wheat kernels to make bread now, or if you're not prepared to start making your own bread and learn how to have a diet off of those. So in other words, with the food you're going to store, you shouldn't be buying stuff that you wouldn't ordinarily eat. The reason I say this is twofold. Not only is going to have to eat it going to be an adjustment on your system, but it'll also affect your mind as you go through, because you're used to certain kinds of comfort food, etc. And so the food that you need to preserve and store away is basically the kind of diet that you would have in any event. Make sense?
Oh, perfect. I have stored wheat like that, and the first couple times I hand grinded up the flour, the only way I could get bread worth a darn was to mix some white flour in with it.
Right. Well, like I say, I'm a vegetarian, so I've got a mill here, and I grind my own wheat. And I've recently gotten into sourdough as a way of leavening bread. And sourdough is really cool because you keep the yeast going from time to time to time. But I love coarse whole wheat bread, and a lot of people don't. And so that's an issue. So if you're going to have to exist on that, you better get used to it, or not try and live that way. Figure out a way to, get your own power and grind the wheat with a mechanical device so you don't wear your arm out, and then figure out a way to sift it out really fine, or use white wheat, etc., to make the kind of food that you really are used to eating. But basically what we need to do is we need to note that, especially in times of stress, and especially in times of stress promoted by disease and through the press, we're going to have to be very careful, pay very careful attention to our diet and our personal mental stability, if you will, so that we make smart decisions. Because bear in mind, these people are pushing us around. They don't have our interests at heart, the powers that be here, and they're going to do everything they can to keep you in a state of fear and panic so that you're easy to herd.
Oh, good point. So we're breaking from the herd. We're the beginning of the refused mix then. Exactly so.
And like I say, let's be smart about it. Let's not play into their games. Let's not go out and do things like riot at the banks or, any of this business, because then all you're doing is giving them power every time you become violent or agitated. There's much sneakier and better ways to take your power back. And that's like, withdrawing your support from the system. The idea that Gandhi had of, smart non-cooperation. And that's all it takes. He drove out the largest empire on the planet without a war.
Right. He did a good job. Do you think, what I was going to get, the other stuff to store, do you think people should have a way to heat their house and like wood stoves and enough firewood stored, get it done before September, October this year to get them through?
It makes sense. Yeah, I agree. It makes sense if you're in that kind of an environment, and you can certainly take those precautions. I've got my personal place here is a small house in the Northwest. We have inclement weather that can get real nasty. I've got solar panels. I've got 850 amp hours and backup power batteries. I've got 2 inverters. I like redundancy. I've got my own well, so I need the inverter to power the well, so we'll have water. I've got the 850 amp hours. I've got a generator. I've got diesel fuel. And the way, if I use my generator correctly, I only have to run it 3 hours a day to charge the batteries up for our typical use. That takes about a gallon of diesel a day. If you store 300 gallons of diesel, you got 300 days worth of fuel. I've got an alternative wood stove I can put in place of the propane stove, but I've got 1,000 gallons of propane. So that's the kind of approach I'm taking. And it kind of It's good. It feels good to be self-sufficient. If you watch TV and you go and you watch on the cable channels, there's this strange show called Living with Ed, this actor guy, Ed Begley Jr., and some of the things you see on there are quite startling. The fact that Jay Leno is out promoting self-sufficiency like mad and has his own huge solar array. So the idea is catching on. And just on the self-sufficiency idea, just being able in these uncertain times to be power independent, it makes sense to do everything you can. If you don't have the ability to, if you don't have a lot of money, and you didn't have the ability to, say, buy gold and silver, then I would certainly put my money towards, getting extra heating oil if you're heat by oil, or laying in firewood, doing everything you can. Basically, consider yourself in a little house on the prairie kind of lifestyle. Do it now while the sun shines, because times are going to be tough and conditions will be quite uncertain here as we get into fall. And if we get a truly nasty economic crash like we're looking at in our data, then all kinds of things change. For instance, one of the things that you notice in a truly undeveloped or economically ravaged country is that the power is infrequent. And it's because people don't show up to work because they're not getting paid, and necessary repairs are not made, and your infrastructure breaks down even further. And so you may have to have firewood just because the power might go out for days at a time, just because we don't have diesel to haul coal to your local power plant.
You got right to my next two questions. How much, if you were storing fuel, if this collapse happens, people won't be going to work, so basically
Correct.
Your gas is going to be for personal use.
Correct, and it's a different world at that stage, and you have to envision, and that's really, I think, perhaps the best part of our reports, is that it helps you envision the concept of what life could be like as this stuff occurs around you. And as you say, if the economic collapse happens, well, a lot of people won't be commuting, and so they won't need all that gasoline. I don't advise storing gasoline, by the way. It's a nasty fuel to deal with and causes all kinds of problems. And if you're going to use things like generators, again, be smart. Look at what you have to do to keep the average 5-kilowatt generator running. You got to change the oil every 5 hours. They claim a 900-hour lifespan on the engine, and you'd be lucky even changing the oil every 5 hours to get 400 hours out of it. And so if you're relying on that for power, those 400 hours will be consumed in a couple of months, and your engine will be shot or the magneto will die. So a 5-kilowatt cheapy generator is not the thing for long term. You need to really examine your options and see what's going on. Now, let's look at what happened in Iraq. Iraq got sat upon by the great Anglo-American Empire. Its infrastructure was destroyed even after a long period of degradation. We totally took it out. The electricity went down to zilch for a long time for big chunks of the country. A natural response to that among the social order there was what we called self-organizing collectives, where a bunch of people would get together and they would hire a guy to run diesel generators and provide the electricity for the whole block or whatever, as well as guard the generators from theft. So it's just a natural kind of a human response. So you may want to consider that. If you live in a small subdivision, you may want to get together with a bunch of your neighbors and say, look, if we look at everybody's power use, they're only using 1.8 kilowatts a day, and they could reduce that by not using dryers in the summer or that kind of thing.